What's good, guys? Fantasy Joe with some early 2022 fantasy football rankings, bringing you my rankings for next fantasy football season. If you guys are new to the channel, make sure you hit that subscribe button. I'll be bringing a ton of off-season content. Probably will take a little bit of a break at some point here, but yeah, we'll still be bringing you tons of off-season content. Dynasty content is a big thing that I do in the off-season, so stick around if you want that good stuff. Okay, let's hop into it. Oh yeah, and if you have any questions or comments, put them in the comment section down below. I'll respond to all your comments. Let me know who you think should be higher or lower in these rankings. These are my early rankings. A lot will change with free agency, and some of this I had to reject a little bit for free agency on what I think is going to happen. But yeah, we'll get into all that. Yeah, let's start it off. So my first player this year, none other than Derrick Henry. This might be a bit of a surprise. I think a lot of people have Jonathan Taylor at number one. I have Derrick Henry there. We've seen the enormous workload he gets on the ground historically, the amount of rushing touchdowns he can still score, and besides this season, his reliability as far as consistency and showing up game in, game out, just being a big back, being able to carry that load, I think that helps. Um, but yeah, we saw him get close to a 10% target share this year, just getting more involved in the receiving game, and I think just a little bit more involvement is just a huge for him. If he can just get check a little bit of those boxes, he can really be a force like he was this year in fantasy, be consistent and offer those giant explosion games that we know he's capable of. So that's why he's my number one. But that takes nothing away from Jonathan Taylor. They're neck and neck to me, almost no difference. Taylor's shown it this season how explosive of a back he is, and that's what we really saw from him and um, hope for is that he can just be that guy who can hit those home runs. Get similar to how Nick Chubb does, and he's involved in the receiving game. So, but a great offensive line, they're focused on running the ball. Which brings us to my number three player. This might be a surprise as well. It's Christian McCaffrey, running back, Carolina Panthers. Here, I'm also going to put, because I'm going to be doing my top 24 today, RB2 and CMC. Maybe that's RB3. Okay, so yeah, Christian McCaffrey is my RB3. Reason being, he's one of the few backs similar to what these backs we saw Derrick Henry do at the beginning of this year and last season, and what we see Jonathan Taylor do this year. Christian McCaffrey has the ability to just put on for your team, be that player who can score, one and a half, two times his positional value, score more than the entire field if he's healthy for long enough spurt. But yeah, we've seen him struggle to stay on the field, and that is concerning, but I do think the risk is worth the reward, honestly, in fantasy football. You're not trying to come in second, you're trying to win your league. And Christian McCaffrey offers the most upside of any of these guys in the first round outside those top two. And you don't draft purely for upside, but I still think he's worthy of that pick. I had the number three pick in a league for next year, and I will most likely be taking Christian McCaffrey if he's there. There's other players I think, are safer. Speaking of, which brings us to my number four player. This might be a surprise as well. I know everyone is going to have Cooper Kupp probably as their wide receiver one. I actually have Davante Adams. Reason being, I project Aaron Rodgers to stay in Green Bay. I think they're going to franchise tag Davante Adams from what I've heard recently. And if that happens, just keeping that connection going, I just think that it's too consistent. Too necessary for that offense, and it's just such a good combination from Rodgers to Adams. And Cooper Kupp is having a career year, but I just think the touchdowns come down a little bit. It's just like the kind of year that he's still in the same realm as Davante Adams, and I think Davante Adams has a higher ceiling, honestly. And I just think the way we're seeing Davante Adams play this year, I think is more consistent, or even I think he has more upside in the bag potentially. I mean, not potentially. We saw 2 years ago how good he was in 13 and a half games with 18 touchdowns. But I feel like I don't want to say this is the bar, but you can basically count on this type of a season from him, and that is just so valuable. And so that's why he's my wide receiver one. Cooper Kupp, who I just talked about, is my wide receiver two, so it doesn't have far to fall. Still, a huge positional advantage. I view them very similarly, honestly, which is speaking immensely of Cooper Kupp, considering how great Davante Adams is. And just, fantasy is obviously different than real life. We're just going to to number six. My number six player is none other than Austin Ekeler, running back for the running back for the Los Angeles Chargers. The reason I have Ekeler at 6, he's been involved in the receiving game. I think he could actually be a little bit more involved next season. I think we could see that. I think the touchdowns will ultimately come down for Ekeler. I just don't know if he's the big enough body to continually get that goal line work. I do see them probably bringing in some kind of back, whether that's through free agency or the draft. But Ekeler is still going to be the guy there. I feel really good about that. And I feel really good about his talent. And it's just like having a player like Ekeler, similar to a McCaffrey, which is like they cannot get schemed out of a game because of anything. They go down big, they're going to be throwing it to Ekeler. They go up, Ekeler's going to be running the ball. It's an awesome asset to have on your fantasy team. And when you catch the ball like that, you become very consistent for fantasy football. Number 7 player, he's a guy I think could go up a lot, honestly, on this list. We always talk about injuries, but Dalvin Cook's a guy who honestly plays most of the games every year, and that's extremely valuable in fantasy. Because I would take a guy who's going to get his type of workload and play in 15 games rather than a guy who's going to get a few less carries and play in 16 or 17 games. Give me the guy who's going to play in 14 games over, all day if I'm getting 22 touches a game or something like that, which is like the type of workload Dalvin Cook is capable of receiving. And, that offense is really built around him, even though they have other good players. Kirk Cousins, a competent quarterback. Justin Jefferson's an absolute star. But, yeah, that's why I have him here. Speaking of our next player, Tyreek Hill. Tyreek Hill, honestly, I think could be right up there. Like, you can't – honestly, I feel like with the top 8 players I've listed so far, you can't really, like, any order you want to take these guys in, I don't have a huge problem with it. Outside of Derrick Henry and JT at 1-2, even if you want to take, Javonte Adams over Derrick Henry, like, you think that's safer, I think that's valid. I think taking Cooper Kupp over any of these guys, But, yeah, and just the type of workload any of these players are capable of receiving and the type of dominance that they've shown is just worthy of taking if you feel good about it. So 9, I have Alvin Kamara, running back for the Saints. Yeah, like I said, so much of this will be affected by the off season, the way it goes. Alvin Kamara being one of those guys because we've seen how good he has been with the workload that he's received this year, getting a ton of carries, fewer receptions. But if they bring in a quarterback who's extremely competent, let's say they trade for Deshaun Watson, Russell Wilson goes there, even reuniting with Teddy Bridgewater. All these I think would be upgrades for Alvin Kamara over the type of quarterback play they've had this season. And I think he's still, when he's been on the field, showed how good he is for fantasy. So if you're getting Alvin Kamara in the back end of your first round and you can stack him with these big-time receivers I'm going to talk about in a minute, you're setting yourself up for success in fantasy football, I think. Our number 10 player, Najee Harris. Love Najee. Another guy who will be extremely affected by this offseason, Big Ben, most likely not back in Pittsburgh. I'd be very surprised if he is. And, I think he leads the NFL in touches so far this year. He's been extremely involved in the receiving game, involved on the ground a ton. Obviously, you both are heavily utilized if you're going to, lead the league in touches. But if that offensive line can improve in any way, shape, or form, I still think this offense is going to be built around Najee with whoever they bring in quarterback unless they get some kind of crazy stud. But the offensive line has to improve for Najee. I think that's the biggest asset or the biggest piece. And then, bring in a competent quarterback. I think he could skyrocket. 11, this might be a surprise as well. I've got JaMarr Chase. I just think JaMarr Chase is an absolute star. I seriously considered him with another receiver I'm about to name. They were neck and neck, but I ultimately went Chase. But, we saw what he did. That 3-touchdown game he had against the Chiefs just went absolutely off. We've seen him have, huge explosion games. And honestly, I think he leads the league in drops or is right next to it in drops. And, he cuts, I think he's at 9 or 10. He cuts that in half. It's just like the type of year he could have is insane. And just the type of talent he is. He reminds me of a more refined, not as big or physically intimidating A.J. Brown, honestly. He runs a little bit better routes. But both are, have very, very good players. But that's who he reminds me of. And I think the tiebreaker between him and Justin Jefferson, who I have at 12, ultimately to me was the quarterback. And I just felt better about Joe Burrow than Kirk Cousins. Although um, Justin Jefferson. Kirk Cousins is more than competent to get the job done with Justin Jefferson. Had a little bit of a moment there. But yeah, I think Justin Jefferson's a stud. One of the most refined route runners. Honestly, reminds me of Davante Adams was never this good when he was a young receiver, but some of the similarities in their game I see are there just with the route running abilities of Justin Jefferson. In the size and speed combination that they both possess with him between Justin Jefferson and Davante Adams. Okay, 13. This one might be a surprise as well. Leonard Fournette. I think he's really good. I think I would be surprised if he doesn't go back to Tampa Bay. I just think the kind of connection and how good he was this year for them, they're gonna bring him back. And if they do, he was I think before he got injured, he had the most receptions of any running back in football. And he was playing behind one of the best offensive lines in football for one of the best offenses. You combine all those factors together. Honestly, if he's back in Tampa for sure, he should be a first-round pick, in my opinion. I'd probably take him ahead of both these receivers. But that's yet to be seen. But I think, Leonard Fournette's a stud, and you should not sleep on him. 14, Joe Mixon. RB9. He's a guy who just gets a huge workload, is involved in the passing game as well, which you love for consistency. And he hasn't even, been super efficient in some of his big games. But I think that's what you want, It's just like he's in a good offense. And I think if they could bring in, some offensive line pieces in the offseason, just help him out a little bit. He is a talented back. And I think he could really, stick around this range. I think he's just so safe with the workload that he's currently receiving in that offense. Our 15th player is Nick Chubb. The tiebreaker between Chubb and Mixon to me was just the fact that Kareem Hunt is going to be in Cleveland again, and he's so capable, especially around the goal line. And that factor just doesn't exist in Cincinnati. Obviously, a much more talented offensive line in Cleveland, but a very talented offense, regardless in Cincinnati. Excuse me. But I think Nick Chubb, they bring in a decent quarterback. I think they'll bring somebody to compete best with Baker no matter what, or replace Baker. And honestly, Baker's played awful this year, so even if Baker comes back, I don't think, they won't hold on to Baker if he's playing this poorly for the entire year. So, he could improve just from the offense improving, I think. Okay, our 16th player, Deebo Samuel. He's been a stud this season. Super talented, just getting the ball in his hands, and that's what Kyle Shanahan does, and that's why he's been so successful. Gets the ball on, those jet sweeps, those tap passes, runs in the backfield. He is honestly just amazing athlete in his hands. He was one of my dynasty buy lows last offseason. Actually had a bunch of good ones in that video with him. I had Aaron Rodgers in there, Dak, Ekeler, a bunch of really high-end players that ended up doing really well in that video. But, Deebo Samuel is a stud. That's why I have him at 16. 17, another stud. I think people are a little too down on, honestly. I think he's going to be a very good value come draft day. This is what I'm saying. If you can snag, this might be a Dalvin Cook or a Alvin Kamara at like 7 through 9 or something, and be able to snag a Deebo Samuel or a Stephon Diggs around 2, like you are building a team that's going to be able to do some good things. And it's balanced from your draft to be able to attack the board rest of the way. But I have Stephon Diggs right now as my wide receiver 7. Diggs, is super heavily targeted. He's still the alpha 1 in that offense. And I don't know if Emmanuel Sanders will be back next season or not. But even if he does, they're going to get Davis to replace him. They'll have competent weapons around him. But Diggs is just super talented. The touchdowns haven't, he's starting to catch a few. I think he had 2, or I don't know if he had 2 against the Patriots or had 1. But he's, the touchdowns I think could go up, and that offers, a ton of potential for him. And we saw that, he could be one of the most targeted, or he could be one of the most, he could be among the league leaders in receptions and yards any given year, I think, with the type of volume he gets in Buffalo. Okay, our next player, DAndre Swift, running back for the Detroit Lions. Only reason he's this low, honestly, is just because JaMarr Williams is going to be there. I think he's going to compete with him. Not compete, he is the one, but JaMarr Williams is going to steal some volume from him. And, it's not a great offense there in Detroit, but they do have a solid offensive line. Swift catches the ball in the backfield. He's consistent. He's a talented runner. I think he's going to be a very good value on draft day as well. 19, I have A.J. Brown. Compared him to, talked about the similarities I see between their games and with him and JaMarr Chase, just their ability in the open field to just do things you don't see anybody else really doing in the league right now. But yeah, I have A.J. Brown at 19, just a stud. Another great draft day value, I think, in 2020. We'll see how boards, end up coming up around draft season. But the way I'm projecting it, I think he'll be a great value. Yeah, and he's just super talented. He's big. He's 6'1", 226. He gets the ball in the open field. He's faster than the guys who can tackle him, and he's faster than the guys who are big enough to tackle him, and he's stronger than the guys who are fast enough to tackle him. So he's a dangerous combination. He gets in the open field, and he just takes off. Love watching him play. And yeah, we'll see how the whole thing goes down with Julio in the offseason. Even if he's still there, I still think A.J. Brown's going to be that one and get 10 targets plus a game. So 20, I have Javonte Williams, running back for the Broncos. Javonte, the thing, I think he could actually go up probably up into the Najee Chubb range as the offseason progresses, I think. I think there is an outside chance they bring Melvin Gordon back, but honestly, I think it will be Javonte Williams' job. And if you combine the inside the 5 carries that Javonte Williams and Chubb both had, or not Javonte Williams and Chubb, Javonte Williams and Melvin Gordon had in last year, combine those inside the 5 carries, I think he would be number 2 in inside the 5 carries in football to Jonathan Taylor, and that'd be 18, which is an absolute ton inside the 5, and those are those valuable carries that turn to touchdowns. Melvin Gordon has 9 touchdowns this year. I don't project those all just sliding over to Javonte Williams, though. Melvin Gordon has shown over the years that he has a propensity for getting into the end zone at a high rate. So I don't think it's just straight transferable, but he's still a talented player. Which brings us to our player 21, tight end 1, Travis Kelce. It was really close for me between him and Mark Andrews for the tight end 1 spot. I went with Kelce eventually just because of the quarterback tiebreaker. Kelce's still, a good player. And outside that little drought he had in the middle of the season, has been putting up solid weeks. He's a guy, though, I think he's worth a back-end second-round pick still, though, because of the positional advantage he could give you. I think when you're talking about the receivers at this range now, he's worth it. But, yeah, he's a guy who honestly might move down my board, might move up my board. He's a real wild card rest of the offseason, to be honest with you. Our 22 player, Antonio Gibson, we saw him become more involved as the second half of the season, and we seem to be dealing with a stress fracture most of this year. I just think there's a lot more upside left in the tank for Gibson that people forget about, and maybe, he's a draft darling this offseason. I think Gibson, is a value, next year just because hopefully, he won't be dealing with that stress fracture, gets the rest he needs this offseason, then he comes back fully healthy. They utilize him hopefully the way they have been recently, and that offense can improve a little bit, maybe. And he could really do some things for fantasy. Our number 23 player, Deontay Johnson. Hopefully I spelled that right. I'm pretty sure it is. He is my wide receiver 9. He's a guy who can move around too. I don't know who his quarterback is. He's just a stud, and Big Ben hasn't been very good this year, and he's still been able to put up good numbers, solid touchdown numbers as well. I expect them to bring in somebody pretty good, either use a high draft pick or bring in a solid free agent. So I think, Deontay is going to get that level of quarterback player better. At least that's what I'm projecting, having him currently ranked this high. But yeah, I just think he's a super talented player, a great route runner, and that's why I have him in my top 24. Brings us to our last player. I just talked about him when I talked about Kelce, Mark Andrews, tight end 2. He could be 1 by the time the season comes around. But the ultimate tiebreaker, like I said, was just the quarterback play. I thought on a consistent basis, Kelce will be a better player. But, Lamar has looked much better as a passer this year, and Andrews is having a fantastic season. He's dominant, and he's had some dominant games as well. Yeah, it'll be really interesting to see where he ends up. Some honorable mentions I had that didn't make the top 24. George Kittle, CeeDee Lamb, Aaron Jones, Ezekiel Elliott, all guys I thought about, but just didn't quite make the cut this time. But definitely some names that could work their way up there in the offseason. And like I said, this is my early ranking, so all this stuff's going to move around a ton. Let me know who you guys think should have made the list, who should be higher, who should be lower, all that good stuff. Let me know in the comments down below. Appreciate you guys, and hit that sub button, hit that like button. This has been Fantasy Joe. I'll see you guys next time.